Okay, I think I'm going to call this one Creation 2.0. Um, I've done two on this already, and each time it seems to do the same thing I always do. I lead off in left field quite a bit, and I'm going to try to stay a little bit centered and just keep deviating out on branches. Okay, so we'll stay centered on a branch and deviate off. But creation is looked at as being, of course, where it all comes from. And nowadays we have a whole idea of Big Bang. Okay, but we have to just take ourselves back to a time whenever we're talking about the Hebrew Bible, if you want to be religious. And it doesn't involve a Big Bang at all. There's no Big Bang mentioned there. People nowadays adopt the Big Bang in and say, well, God caused that, and that caused this, and this caused us. Well, okay, well. And, Big G's always been looked for. Now, they're looking for Higgs boson and gravity particles, and a particle that does cause and impart gravity, and that's now the new big G for science. So, regardless of that fact, let's look into this a little bit and see what we can't glean out. If you haven't done a lot of looking into Sumerian um, ancient mythology or ancient cultures mythology, or really studied any of this, or tried to be a truther in any way, you're probably not going to understand a lot of what I'm talking about. And I don't mean to talk over your head and just say, blah, 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 whenever you may not. Now, this little conversation here is also going to be based on places that they say things and then conjecture of what that could be and how this could be. And so it's going to be my personal conjecture on things, of course, built in with the idea of facts and not going just off the Bible, but off of science and archaeology and history, and trying to attach the Bible to that. And it becomes a much different issue, people, if you've ever tried to do this. So, looking at it, it looks like Adam and Eve were in a garden that was already pre-made, right? Okay, so this led me to a lot of deductions, and I ended up coming up with a couple of hypotheses here about, well, actually about 18 years ago. No, maybe about 20, 21 years ago now. But I digress. I came up with another hypothesis that really just said the same thing again and threw in a couple of more facts. And it's only grown in facts since then. So let's look at this idea. Adam and Eve, you can tell that in the Bible they talk about a genetic situation, that they're taking something that's existing and then making it better. And there are two different creations listed in the Bible. The first one says he creates all the creatures in man and woman. Man and woman, he created them in his own image. So he's already got people. And then after these people are there, existive on the planet, he ends up taking certain ones, Adam, and it says that he uses the afar, which this would be something that's already existing from there. Everybody says, well, that's dust and dirt because what was there in the primordial earth? Well, we now find out that there was cavemen and there was primordial men, and maybe that's the ones that they're talking about in the very first of it. So this isn't probably happening on day 8 or 9 or anything like that. Truthfully, nobody really believes that it all happened in 7 days, that maybe there, a day's 1,000 years in God's mind, and so it's 7,000 years. It's all these, it's got to be a hell of a lot longer, to end up going through the phase of things, but I digress. So, what we have here is something that seems like there's already primitive man around, and then he takes a certain set of men or people in some way and genetically messes with them. And when he does so, he creates Adam. Now, he doesn't have a mate that will go with Adam, though. And truthfully, we can't mate with apes in any way. They have more chromosomes than us. We have 24, they have 26. Our last two are fused together. It's really kind of done some kind of fusing together at the end of our chromosome, like this. By the way, that fusing like that at the end of our chromosome, which really should look like this, that fusing that's there that looks like this, on every other creature, it's supposed to mean instant death. It's kind of worse than Down syndrome. It really is. And how could this happen? And then it be a good mutation, and it actually look like a step down in our genes. That's there's a mutation, and here's your sign that something happened to us a long time ago. And mankind has been trying to figure out, ever since we figured out ugh, pretty much where it all came from, what started it. And of course, men make up ideas, men make up theories. In fact, no matter how religious you are, you think everybody else's religious theory was made up by men, but yours somehow is not. So, and I don't mean to offend with this, I mean to give you a different view upon things, because if you look at the Bible, it says that it goes back to about, well, I don't know, 4,000, 4,200 maybe BC, right? And 6,000 years. And we find out now that if we look in the land of Ur, that they talk about with Abraham, where he had come from, where it looks like the whole genetics thing starts out and happens from, it seems that they have civilizations that go back to 7,000. And that's written. And then surely they have civilization before then, because when we see them pop up like popcorn, they actually have the wheel and agriculture and advanced math, and there is no sign that these people ever kind of went A, B. In fact, there's no sign of the wheel evolving at all. The first wheel we find is actually attached to an axle, attached to another wheel that's up under a cart, and gets pulled by a beast of burden. So that becomes a strange thing that just out of nowhere, and it's because we don't have any art or any literature from back then. And it makes sense, people would probably make things like the wheel and stuff maybe before something as complex as written language to keep long term. I mean, people can talk to people and get things out, but how do they get things out that I want to say to you and you to me long term, and thus writing gets formed? But let's look at this in an encapsulated moment here. What we have here, it looks like, is there's a special civilization that we're finding that seems highly advanced, almost like your Atlantean civilization. And indeed, one of the, ancient towns in Ur area, in Sumeria, had the rivers run through it and up under the gates and around it, and they had a walled circular city, and it really almost, it doesn't come across as grandiose as we actually think Atlantis really is. In our mind now, it has to have been something that looked better than the Greeks with Greek stuff, because they talked about it being advanced. So we make pictures of that and a giant island and big towers and something that looks very Camelotish, of course. But if he said it happened 8,000 years ago, then something that's badass 8,000 years ago is probably not going to be as good as what he's even sitting there talking about. Yet he tells you how badass they were. And that may be just in comparison to everything that's come before and even since, where they're trying to catch up with mathematics of these Sumerian people that were lost. And in truth, look at my video on, it says Sumerian trigonometry. They've now figured out that they had a set of trigonometry that works on angles and things based on 6 and 60 in their mathematics that they used, that's actually better and more accurate and easier than our own trigonometry. It almost makes you think, if Einstein was to get a hold of that, what actually he could have done with it. But I digress again. I'm sorry. So genetics happen, and it seems like there's a cloning situation on there, that this actual word that they use and wording they use seems to be a cloning or a clipping or a piecing of when they make Eve. And it transposes as rib, and we've always had this rib. In fact, there is a goddess known as Lady of the Rib, and she is a primordial goddess in Sumeria, known as the lady who creates. And it could give some idea. Now, Sitchin, if you've ever looked into his stuff, he's got some crazy ideas, spacemen, giant planets that are about to destroy the Earth and things, and I don't really agree with most of that. But then again, just like all of my studies, I find a lot of truth in what somebody says, and it leads you one way, or in fact, your disproving of that kind of shows you just a slight different view of what it really looks like. Maybe just a different view on things, you know. You zoom in and you get to see a supernova like this right here, and you never would have thought that it looked like a star in our sky till we were able to zoom in. It makes you wonder how the Sumerians knew of Saturn and how it had rings around it and all the things that they apparently knew. But we have this idea of, you know, God's creation and that he had molded the earth. Well, this looks like him igniting the sun. Let there be light, isn't it? That's what that is. And there are Sumerian stories where back at first, when the earth was first created, that it got smacked and knocked in half like this. And then the other half that reformed us and made us even bigger than we would have been was part of a primordial dragon goddess called Tiamat. And she left behind our moon. And indeed, there are guys that are now saying that we got our moon from someplace else and that it's not natural for it to be in its location, too. They almost search for odd things that sound like Sumerian tales. But Sumeria goes back from there all the way to the Arata civilization, it seems. I mean, their origin, supposedly from Enki, says that they started in the Arata area and then they moved down into the plains to cultivate and have man do the thing after they create him. And then they end up having a war with Arata. You know, there's the lords of Arata, and they have a problem with it, and everything gets kicked off. And indeed, in the Bible, there's this idea that that they may have messed up when they created man. You can find this in some Gnostic texts, especially, that they may surpass them themselves and cause a problem. And what it really harkens to is genetics. You look at things like wheat, and they know now that wheat, you can't take two species of wheat that they could have possibly found on the far ends of wherever they could go, and then crossbreed them or do anything, even though it shows them doing this cultivating of plants, this biology, right? It couldn't have formed that. That there has to be something that they genetically stepped in there. Somebody had to do something on that Monsanto range type thing that turned corn and turned corn. Well, they did call all grains corn and cereal too, by the way, from the god Ceres. But and she was the mother goddess too of grain and harvest. She's pretty much the female counterpart to Cronus and El. But anyhow, the concept that you can genetically modify something like that seems to be something they know about from way, way back when. And indeed, we know today that we can't see it, but primordially a wolf and a dog were the same thing, but they befriended modern man before we were modern man. And that genetically we've turned them into all the different dog species you see today. Big, small, curly hair, almost no hair, long hair, shaggy, silly looking, giant, dopey. I mean, and dogs that are incredibly smart, you know. Shelties come to mind, and all of the, you know, major species of dogs are incredibly intelligent. Everybody that's owned a dog knows that they got some snap going on, and they recognize words, gestures, all kinds of things. They know what to do from that. They're eager. It's just amazing. Well, what's to say that if you can turn a wolf into a dog, that you couldn't take primordial men and genetically mess with them in a short period of time and have something come out of it that was somehow remarkable? Well, that cloning thing I was talking about a minute ago, where it's all pinched in like this, if that happened, you wouldn't be able to breed with another one that didn't have that aspect. So the only idea you can be forced with is that, and it's such a rare thing if somebody was to be able to make it through that. I mean, it's got to be one in a gazillion that they'd be able to live through it. But when they do, you'd have to end up having another one that would have that same mutation that was genetically compatible, and then they accidentally ran into each other in primordial time, and that's your Adam and Eve, Adam and Hueva, which Hueva sounds like egg, doesn't it? In fact, huevos is eggs. So and females carry the egg. It's like they knew with these names how all this stuff kind of works, but then they didn't quite have it figured out. And your Hebrew Bible shows you that they don't have a clue. They think the world's flat. They think there's a glass dome over the earth with water outside of it, and stars are just bubbles in the sky and things like that. So it's kind of odd that there is a lot that you can find in the Bible, again, that has a, to this day, something you can go, man, they knew something. And then there's other times where you go, they had no clue idea what's going on. And so there's supposed to be this primordial spot where Adam and Eve, and it's got to be just two people. And indeed, it could go down, literally, to two people genetically that are manipulated, and it all comes from that. Because the story of Enki and Ninharsag talks about how they've made all these primordial people, and what are they going to do with them? And of course, the story that we have now, most people believe, is not even ancient Sumerian. It's actually late Sumerian, which is probably actually Akkadian. And it seems almost that what happened was the primordial people that created them in the first place got all killed off by the barbaric half-breeds that they had ended up creating themselves. In fact, if you look in pretty much, Greek and Roman and all these, there's always this half-god thing, like Gilgamesh and things that cause problems, like Marduk, like all these half-gods that somehow are the ones that cause the problem. Like there's a half-god that kills a god and it goes away. And if you look at the other people's stories, it looks like Sumeria, it just disappears. And then all of a sudden it turns into Akkadian, and they've got the same stories, but they're looking at it from a slightly different viewpoint, and that's what we have our base on. But there's a different view, and that's why Sitchin got his view, is because before the Marduk thing, there's a whole set where On and everybody's doing their deal, even though On only shows up on the planet twice. There's so much to this. There's so much to this. It really seems that Adam and Eve were actually genetic experiments, that they were possibly one of these things in Sumeria where they had genetically made these people. And if you remember the story, they get kicked out and go, whenever Enlil takes over, they get kicked out and have to run all the way down to Africa, where they continue to do these experiments. And then there's an avenging and everything going on. And you look at the Bible, and it's almost like it's written as a narrative, but from where the people get ping-ponged around through it. And where they end up, because they're nomadic tent people. And which gods they worship and stray away from the one true God, right? Well, Abraham, when he comes over, he would be in Canaanite lands, in the land of El, and in the Phoenicians, and down into the Egyptian land. And Egyptians are known as the dark-haired people, and in fact, the Akkadians have the stories of the dark-haired people, and it seems to be a conquest, something that's going to yin and yang, that's always there. And that could be because they're the last remnant of that. Minky was managed to the underworld. The underworld is only anything that's up under the equator. It's back in the olden times. The Sumerian idea I get on it is that all you have to do is go past the equator and go south, down to the abyss. Africa is the underworld. The underworld is down there. So they know where the sun crosses at its median. And they're like, this is the overworld, that's the overworld, and in fact, they kind of know how the world stands, and we talk about north and south and up. And it's kind of why we probably have that same orientation to this day. But it harkens to an idea that they genetically messed with people that they thought after a while would get stronger than themselves. And indeed, one of the tablets talks about Enki having accelerated us from our primordial creature that he found to 13 times faster. And when I looked into this, it's more like 12 times faster, because the 13th is the one of you. So there's that 12 special again somehow. Well, it really says it's 6 times 2. And of course, everything's about their 6. And you wonder what that means. And if there's some 6 modification going off each chromosome band, or what goes on, don't know. But then it does say that it goes 13 times faster. And then it acts like that conjunction right there is bad. Like, uh-oh, I made him go 12 times, but 13 times faster. And so it's going to accelerate, and this could be a problem. And I'm guessing the problem is mentioning that eventually these people could become smart and come back and dominate back on us and cause an extreme problem. And indeed, the Sumerians disappear. We have no idea, and it took us now thousands and thousands of years to go back and find them. And when we do, we find the stories of Adam and Eve. We find the stories of creation. We find Noah's Ark. We find, the apple, the Garden of Eden idea, and getting taken out of that and becoming as a god, and all these situations where it would come out of. And it's kind of funny that they don't correlate it right off the bat, and they try to deny it, because Abraham came from Ur. And so here's where those stories come from, when you go, yeah, but that was the stories of the pagan gods. And then people are just shrugging their shoulders and going, yeah, well, that's where it says it creates from. I mean, he says he left from his ancestors. So Noah and all the people, they were only a few generations past Noah. Noah only died 6 years before Abraham left, supposedly in Midrash. So if you go back off that, then you would say Noah and his ancestors, all the way back, Adam and Eve, and everybody would have been worshiping other gods. And then that puts you in a standpoint to believe that this story from there on is going to be Abraham searching for other gods than the one of creation. And indeed, there's a bias towards Abraham and the people that are over here towards the Babylonian people through the entire Bible, all the way through, even in the New Testament, where the horror of Babylon, and how some woman had caused the whole damn problem because she grew up from a rib and ate from a magic tree because the talking snake told her to. And there's got to be some truth in all of that too, but people, there's no talking snakes and magic trees. I mean, what is the reality here? First of all, there's no apples there. And it kind of lets you know that where's apples? Well, they're up in Greece. That's where they start, and up through there in Europe. So whenever they wrote the story, they were definitely up there. And the concept of the forbidden fruit and the fruit that's on trees that's magical is also Greek and Roman. And there's a whole lot of Roman and Greek to this. In fact, it's now almost been just short of being proven that Titus Flavius and his campaign to kill off the Jews in the Jewish revolt, which was 66 to 73 AD, was none other than the actual Armageddon that's written in the Bible, and that it is actually a story of Titus and his campaign back through there, and it really had no bearing on Jesus. And that's why there's this conspicuous thing that the Jews never agreed on Jesus, and they go, he might have been a prophet to help people out, but he wasn't. We don't even know what you're talking about. And they stood on that standpoint for a long time. Then they finally kind of went with it because it looked like it at least made everybody go with them. And Judo-Christians have to believe both books, don't they? And I guess Christians really do too. If you think about it, Christians have to believe that all the bullshit in the Old Testament is what caused Jesus to come and do all the things in the New Testament. And, it all harkens back to sacrifice and killing and blood sacrifice and cannibalism, where Jesus asked you to eat of his flesh and drink of his blood. And that's a totally weird thing. Look in some of my other videos. I won't go into it in this one. I don't want to gore you up with any of that during a Genesis talk. But so it really looks like, there's more to this, and I should have made notes and go, but I just really wanted to wing this like I normally do and try to get it out in a common sense run of thought, staying on the same tree branch idea. That it seems like Adam and Eve come much later. They're a genetic creature that's created, and because they screw up in some way, they get kicked out. And then there's always enmity between that creature that's allowed to be in the garden, that snake, and those people. In fact, that enmity is to this day reflected back how Christianity and Jews don't like Islam, and Islam don't like this, and it's really the people of the Tigris and Euphrates against the people over here of the Levant area in Egypt, isn't it? And how it all plays out over time. In history is always written by the victors, and just like it would have been a totally different world right now if World War II would have gone different. And just like it would have been a totally different world now if things back here, way back when, would have gone a little different. And we can see that it looks like out of nowhere we jump out. We genetically just jump up. There's this big missing link, and then there's all of a sudden variations of humans that just pop up and go and kind of advance a little bit too quick for evolution. And then all of a sudden, here we are. And the reason we're in this predicament of not knowing what we're doing or where we come from is because we're the most advanced creature on the planet. And I don't know if you can think of it right now in your mind, but if you thought of us not being the most advanced creature on the planet, that advanced creature would know a whole lot more than us, and he'd have to figure it out, and we would be kind of done to the situation. So there's a leveling there. And when you get to the highest rung, you're the one that's got to figure it out. We're figuring it out, but it doesn't have anything to do with magic trees. And the whole creator situation, I mean, there are great people now that are coming up with the truth of all this, is that these were all once one people. It goes to the Tower of Babylon where things get messed up. One way, quickly before I end this, to show you that there were people before Adam and Eve. And everybody's, for 1,000 years or more, people have been trying to make apologies and make up whatever they want to say about this. But when Cain slays Abel, and Cain gets banished to the land of Nod, where he ends up taking a wife, right? That wife doesn't come from anywhere. They haven't had any other kids, and they've always tried, well, they don't mention women and all this other stuff. But the truth of that is that there were people, and because he thought he was going to get killed by them. As soon as I show up and they go, we'll put a mark on you so you won't get killed. I don't know what mark it is. Who knows? Maybe they branded him, or just maybe he put a cross on his chest, but they wore a cross on their chest. So when he showed up, they were like, oh, he's one of us, and he's one of those advanced things. And by the way, that hybridization that would have happened from Cain would have been what took up whoever he ran into's people, evolved them with just a few generations and starting to get spread through, and then them interbreeding with each other. And within 1,000 years, everybody there would be advanced. And you'd have variations on a theme of that. And indeed, what we have today are variations on a theme of all of that. And Inky and them made all the colors of people, and they made special adaptations. And the people of Africa were adapted to be able to stand the sun. And so they were in Africa, and the people that were able to stand here, I mean, most of the Aryan races they made are very similar to each other, but they have lighter skin, maybe perhaps to absorb more sunlight like a polar bear does. And that'll give you the ability to draw in more sun during the cold. So people that are trapped up north, people that are trapped down south. During the last ice age, there was only a thin band in the middle. This was the land of milk and honey. It was an equator, and it wasn't that large of an area that you could not get up too high in or too low in, and winter was going to be so devastating it was going to try to kill you. And you really couldn't follow the seasons unless you stayed just right in the tropics in the middle, just like today, where if you stay there, there's kind of a year-round ability to eat. And those people would have been the ones that would have been able to exist and make it through. And very rarely would there have been somebody walking all the way up through the ice and making it through the continental ice shelf. And that's why America was so barren whenever we came. Anyhow, like if you like this, subscribe to me if you will. And I can't wait to show you some more info that I've got coming up on a lot more exciting vids here too, people. So keep in touch. Thanks.